All right, welcome back to Almost Average. So today, got a huge table of parts here that we are planning on putting on the STI. So, been kind of stockpiling these parts up for the past 4 or 5 months, waiting on a perfect opportunity. If you can't tell already, I'm in a nice heated garage bay out of the elements, so can really just leave this thing sit for a couple days and knock out all the parts that we've really been wanting to install. First and foremost, we are going to redesign the front suspension. So with that, I've got new control arms, some caster plates, tie rod ends, things like that. The car has a really awesome set of coilover suspension on it, but unfortunately the steering geometry of the front end was never really fixed. My bushings in the control arms aren't the greatest. I'll talk to you guys a little bit more about that later when we talk about the 08 to 2010, I think it was, STI versus the new control arms, which is what these are. Have a little bit different design. Even though they are OEM, they're still an upgrade. So like I said, we'll get a little more into the details of that when we get into the front end. We got valve cover gaskets, you know, Subaru life. While we're in there, might as well put some plugs in. And it's always best to drain the oil before you do the valve cover gaskets. It just saves you a lot of headache of the oil leaking out when you're trying to pull those valve covers off. So I went ahead and got an oil change. Behind that, we have transmission flush. What else do we got? Brake clean, always a necessity, right? Keep everything nice and clean. Already got the drain plug out on the oil, so we're letting that all do its thing, you know. And yeah, let's just jump right into it. So valve covers first, then we will jack the front end up, get into the suspension. Once we're done with all the suspension work, then we'll do the transmission flush, and that will be a wrap on the episode. Sounds easy. Let's see what really happens. So in this case, over on the right side, we're going to take out the battery. The fuse box shouldn't really mess with us a whole lot. Some of these extra wires and things like this, we can kind of just get some zip ties, zip them out of the way. Right side's not too bad. There's a lot more over here on the left side. So let's knock this out first, then we'll move over to the left side. Once you get this battery out of here, it opens up a lot of room. And I know there's 7 of you right now judging me for my corrosion on the battery. I just cannot help it. I have taken this thing out, scrubbed it, cleaned it, baking soda, Coca-Cola, whatever you want to use. I have tried every product imaginable, and for whatever reason, it just will not go away. This battery is not the greatest, but it still starts my car, so until I can upgrade to like a AGM or maybe a lithium battery, something like that, we're always going to have this issue. So, nature of the beast, right? Alright, first thing I'm going to do is pull out my plugs, kind of see what they're looking like for condition wise, and then we'll start taking out the bolts for the valve cover gasket itself. Man, those are tight. Be careful with your connectors because these things like to get brittle over time, so everything else looks okay. Alright, when it comes to Subaru plugs, typically, let's see if this will work. Typically you want 2 3-inch extensions. Kind of like this guy right here. 2 of these, that way you can put one on your socket. Get it started and then connect the other one. Because these things are a little hard to get into. Alright, there we go. I might be able to get my socket on that. Alright, so this is one of my favorite ratchets. Right here, it's an old Cobalt, but it doesn't have gears. It's just like a clutch type thing. So you can literally move it just a tiny little bit and get into what you're trying to get into. Really cool. So when you're in tight spots like this one, it's perfect. Had this thing forever. I don't know They typically sell them around Christmas time. Alright. Some of the things I've done on this car here lately make me wonder, so I'm very curious about what type of plugs we have, what the gap's set at, and what to expect here. Alright, here we go. Well, not awful, honestly. See if I can get the camera to focus in here. Camera, hey, pay attention, bud. There we go. Not the worst looking plug. That's about what you want to see. Good consistent burn all the way through. See if they're NGKs. Oh yeah. These are the Iridium ILFR6 Alpha. Let's go check the others. Exactly the same plug, so that's good. These are an NGK Iridium. That's the ones that came out of it. These are as well NGK Iridiums, right? So that's what the factory calls for. Now, I was curious if these were one step colder or not, and they are not. So how can I tell that? The way that you tell if a plug is the colder version, I guess, look at the porcelain inside of your tube here. So see how far that porcelain sticks out from the casing, right? And then if you take a look at the stock one there beside it, you'll see that they both stick out the same amount. So when a plug is colder, that porcelain will be recessed a little bit more inside of your casing here, to where basically the plug is colder as it fires, versus if it's not colder, your porcelain will stick out further, closer to your electrode, I think is what they call that on the end there. So that's how you can tell. Now these should be preset from the factory to 32 thousandths, but I like to check them. I've already checked this one and it is 32 thousandths. And the way I got that was, I take my two feeler gauges. I have one 22 thousandths, one 10 thousandths. So if I add those together, that gets me 32 thousandths, and we will check the new one, which fits in there perfectly. So these are already pre-gapped at 32 thousandths. I'll go ahead and check all of them just to be on the safe side, but you always want to make sure right before you install them, just in case. You never know, somebody might have dropped this at the factory. Now your gap's all jacked up, and your car's not going to run very good when you put it back in. Alright, so this other ratchet was a little skinnier. Let's see if we can get it broke loose. There we go. Okay, now, before you get too far, make sure you take your ratchet off, because if you back it out too much, then you're going to be stuck. So crack it loose with your ratchet, then take it the rest of the way off with your wrench. Okay. Quart pack looks decent. Probably could be replaced at some point, but not today. Still firing good, so when it comes to coil packs, they either work or they don't. So pretty much know when they're bad. Alright, so this is the one. What you want to do is send your socket down in there first. And then you kind of get it on basically with your finger. Come behind it with your 3-inch extension. Put this extension in. Something like that. You should be able to take them out. Also, your battery tray over here serves as your tool tray. Okay, so same thing with these. You probably want to crack them loose, but don't back them off too much because your ratchet's going to get stuck up against the framework rail. Luckily, your plug shouldn't be extremely tight, so if you're like me, you waited to work on your car when it's 5 million degrees, so you'll scorch your finger the whole time. Alright, so that plug, sorry for the shaky, it's pretty decent. I'll take it. Alright, let's go grab the new one. Alright, we got a little status update here. So, driver's side is back on with the coil packs and everything, but what I had to do was unbolt the engine. Let me get up underneath here. Don't mind the oil pan missing, we'll get into that here in 1 second, but take the 2 nuts off of your engine as well as your transmission back here. use your jack to lift it up a little bit. Makes getting to those back corner bolts much easier. And you'll notice that I've removed the oil pan. So what happened was, I've been suspecting it's leaking for a while since I lifted up the oh, what's that? Oh, that's silicone. But since I lifted up the engine to do the valve cover, I decided to go ahead and do the oil pan gasket as well. So that's currently what I'm chipping away at. Alright, so the oil pan's already cleaned up. Went up the street, got me a new gasket, got some gasket material here. Ultra black, best stuff around for oil pans. And I would recommend, if you're doing a Subaru oil pan, to buy you a gasket. Reason being is, if you're reusing your oil pan, there's a good chance that as you were prying it off, or the guy before you pried it off, whatever, it probably got bent, right? And it's very, very difficult to get that completely flat again. Now you can just use silicone on your oil pan gasket like the last guy before me did, but what happens is you still have some imperfections in the pan itself, and that's where the gasket comes into play to kind of take up those imperfections and level everything out. So, recommended to use a gasket. Alright, we're going to put some silicone around here. Alright, there is the pan side. Now, I'm going to do gasket. Simply lay that on top there. You want to give it a little wiggle back and forth just to ensure that silicone actually kind of absorbs into the gasket a little bit. Okay, good to go. Alright, now I'm going to do this one more time. Do it a little differently this time, because this is going to be the block side. So I'm only doing a very, very thin coat on the block side, because I really don't want pieces of silicone material in there with my rods and pistons and all that stuff. Now don't be like me. Make sure you grab all your tools before you crawl up under here, because it is a pain in the butt to get under here with your new oil pans, got all your silicone on it, and realize, hey, I forgot half my stuff. But now we're good. I got it. So, also don't forget about these, the O-rings on your dipstick. This is a very common area for Subis to leak, and you'll notice that they don't actually come with this in the oil gasket or the oil pan gasket kit. So just break out your O-ring kit and grab you a couple fresh O-rings to put on there, because that is a very common area for them to leak. Alright, and just double checking everything real quick. Looks like we're good, so we are ready to start putting the pan back on. Now, slow and steady is the key here, so watch your oil pickup as you come up and over, and then you kind of have to navigate your dipstick here because it is right in the way. Okay. Bring that over a little bit. Okay. Now you can start reintroducing your dipstick up top here. Okay, and as long as you got it lined up, that's okay. Alright, and the oil pan is where it needs to go for a second. I'm just going to get a few bolts started here. The ones I can actually reach and access somewhat easy. Like I said, we'll run the bolts in today, but we're not going to tighten them down. Give this silicone an opportunity to really settle in. Okay, when it comes to the oil pan bolts, don't forget they do have a Phillips head end on them, so it makes it a lot easier to run them up in there as I drop one in the oil pan. But it makes it a lot easier. Or you could get you a little cordless impact bit driver or something like that. Would be a lot faster, but Screwdriver works. Passenger side valve cover is back on. Complete pain in the butt there. Let me turn on my light. But we got it. Also, down here, got the oil pan all sealed up. Still got to put the final torque on it today. You can see how shiny my subframe is. That was from the oil leak before. So hopefully, no more oil leak. But let's get to what we've been wanting to get to all along. So it is a couple days later. The valve covers are on. The oil pan gasket is already on. It's had some time to set up. I had to wrap it up really fast the other day because I don't know if you can see to your right, there's a fire truck. We're getting some bad weather right now. This is a pump truck, so they didn't want the pumps to freeze. So we offered to let them park their truck in our space here. It's a nice heated bay, so nothing's going to freeze in case they need to use the fire truck. So that's how you do it, right? Anyways, we're going to double check to make sure the valve covers aren't leaking today. Remember when I said the other day that we might have to replace the battery? Well, we did. The battery kicked the bucket the other day, went out to start it, and it was just cranking very, very slow. Charged it overnight, but it still just didn't have that cranking amp that it needed. So we replaced it with an AGM Duralast. So good battery. Hopefully provides about 5 to 6 years of starting power because them things are expensive. Today we're going to focus on the upper spring perch as well as the max caster plate from Cygnus. So we kind of looked at those a little bit on the intro. We'll get those swapped out. What we got to do right now is get the car up in the air, get these wheels pulled off, and start on the suspension. So the overall process of taking the coil spring out is relatively straightforward. So you have two main mounting bolts right here that are 19 mils, and then you have your ABS line on this side and your brake line over on this side. So as long as you take all those out, then you should be good to go. And there's 3 up top for the top plate. I've already broke these loose. No, just kidding. I don't think I tightened them when I put this back together yesterday, honestly, because that's excessively loose. But good thing the bolts didn't fall out and I didn't have to go very far. Okay, so there's those two for the brake line and the ABS sensor. I'm going to pull those out. Now I am having a light that came on this car. It's the hill start assist light, and I do not know why that light came on. So we're going to troubleshoot that a little bit here in a minute. Try to figure out what's going on there. I always like to just throw my, oh, there goes my light. I always like to throw my bolts back in here just to make sure that I don't lose them. And then now we'll break these two loose. So before you go taking your 2 hub bolts out, this upper one is your camber adjustment. That's the one you want to mark in place. No matter how you decide to do that, make sure that the head of the bolt stays where it was. Otherwise, you're going to need an alignment. Now, I do recommend probably getting an alignment anyways after you do this type of work, because you'll see here in a second, with this bolt being stationary, I can still move my hub assembly quite a bit and get quite a bit of camber out of this, even without moving the bolt. However, what I like to do is take a chisel. I've done it on this side over here, lay it across the bolt head and the strut face, and just hit it one time, just enough to score it to where there's a distinct line. And I'll show you here in a few minutes what that looks like when we get everything off here. Now these should not be super tight because I did just have them off a couple days ago. And I've already marked the location of my camber. So we should be good on that front. That's what your camber bolt looks like. So see how the upper portion is a little bigger right here? So as the hub rotates out, it pushes that away. I don't know if you can see that very good, but that's how you get your camber adjustment. Now you see how easily that hub moved? Even with that camber plate, or I'm sorry, with the camber bolt up top here, you're still going to get a lot of movement out of that. So like I said, just don't trust your camber bolt that much. You probably want an alignment when you're all said and done. Now that those two are separated, all you have to do is take your hub assembly, just work it back and forth easily, because it will kind of drop out of the way. Make sure your ABS line isn't caught on nothing, brake line's good. And then your hub assembly or your strut's relatively free. Yep, and it is just 3 bolts up top here. Really simple to take off. These should not be tight. These kind of just hold your strut in place. They're not a, oh, no, that one was tight. Yeah, these should be relatively loose. They're very easy to break. I think most of the time the torque is like 11 to 12 foot-pounds on these. So last thing you want to do is break the head off of one. Okay, so what you want to do, take 2 of the bolts out, put them somewhere, and then on the last one, so as you're unscrewing this one, that whole strut is going to be dropping. So as you go to loosen up the final one, just kind of reach around and hold the shock down here. If you put a little pressure on it, you should be able to take it off with your hand. Just don't let the shock drop because your ABS line and your brake line's right there. Now I should just be able to lower that and we're good to go. Cool. What you might have noticed is these are the max caster plates. Now, again, I had to get my car wrapped up really fast yesterday, so I went ahead and threw these on. But in my haste, put them on backwards. So this actually needs to go on the right side and then vice versa. We need to flip-flop the 2 hats. Didn't really make a difference on the car, but it was a mistake. But now I can show you guys how to replace these. And I got the old ones right here to kind of show you how bad they truly were. So this is the old camber plate. Not too bad, really. You can still use this. I'll probably end up selling these. The only thing this didn't offer that this one does is that caster. So you can kind of see, if I put them in the same orientation, that the actual top of the spring sits a lot further back. So what that does is add that 1.2 degree of caster into these plates versus where this one just had a static caster. Basically whatever your factory was, which I think on my car was like 6, maybe 6 or 7. I believe it's 7 after these, but about around 6 with these. So you just get what you get. Now, this is what I really wanted to replace. This is the upper spring perch. So sits right in this area here. And as your spring turns, there's a radial bearing right here that your spring rotates on. As you can see, that bearing is pretty bad. So wanted to get these. What happens, salt and everything gets trapped up in there, and that won't even really rotate. I don't know how I was steering, but probably had a lot to do with my crappy steering feel. Anyways, let's get to how to break this shock down. Now, first thing you want to do is up here on your upper plate, you have your dampener adjustment. So there's a very small Allen key in the top of it. You just take this little Allen key out, get the right size first, because that lets the nut below come off. Oh, come on. Make me look weak on the camera. Oh, okay. Be right back. Oh, satisfying click. And you just want to pull those off there. Now, these aren't necessarily any certain way. You don't have to mark it before you take them off there. So good to go on that front. Now there is a little O-ring below them. Make sure you don't lose that. Just kind of keeps water from getting trapped up inside of them. So I just take my O-ring, put it right back in the bottom of the adjuster. You don't want to take the shock off yet. Before you do, you have an Allen key that holds your preload, right? So you're going to break that loose. Now these aren't necessarily designed to be extremely tight either. So what you can do is break this loose. I did have a special tool around here somewhere. I may or may not be able to find it when we go to do it. But once you broken the Allen key loose, it's pretty easy to back these off. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then I'll show you how to reset the preload when we put it back together. Oh, that's going to be tight. Let's see if this will work. You don't need a lot, and you really don't want to scratch these things up. So, yeah. So, all I'm using, this is from a coil spring compressor, but what it does is just grab onto the whatever you want to call those little recessed parts of the coil spring. You can take it and rotate it. Like I said, it doesn't take much. They do make special tools for these that kind of prevent you from scratching up the nice, pretty blue finish, but here we are. Got to get this done, so didn't have time to wait on new ones to come in. Now, if you do, oh, that's a good scratch. Good job. There we go. Now, if you do want to order a set, they're relatively cheap. And that gets all the tension off the spring. It's that easy. So a lot different from a traditional coil spring. You're not dealing with all that excess pressure inside of these. The preload is very, very low on these as compared to like a traditional strut. So there's not a lot of pressure on those. You can see there's no tension on the spring, so that I can take this top nut off. It's not going to blast and hit me in the face or nothing crazy. I believe this is a 21 or a 19. Now with the upper nut, you do have to use an impact gun right here because the shaft on the shock will try to spin inside. And if you don't have an impact to break that loose, then you're going to have a hard time getting this off. Impact makes it way easier. Just take that upper bolt off and simply slide the caster plate off of there. Now that we have that off, we can get into our spring perch. So that's the new one. You can see here how easily it spins. Much, much better. As compared to what came off of it. That's spinning on my finger. But that bearing will not even spin. So those were seized 100%. Now, we just have to go get the other one and do the same thing. Swap out the tops, and we're done. So this next step is specific to the Cygnus. This is an X1 Classic. Do your own research when it comes to setting preload. This is what was written by Mr. Jeff Cygnus, the designer of these shocks. I will supply the article below. He has all kinds of awesome technical information that he posts on his website. Preload comes from the adjustment. You're going to measure your spring length first, uncompressed. So make sure there is no tension on the spring whatsoever. Now these should measure about 7 inches. And if I start right at the top underneath that spring perch we just put on, it is exactly 7 inches on the dot. The preload that we want to get out of these is only 1/4 of an inch. So therefore, as I move this in on our measuring tape, we're going to go 1/4 of an inch. So 6 3/4 should be our final measurement of the spring. Preload is now set. So that is your factory preload on the Cygnus X1 coilover. Now, like I said, on any other coilover, it's probably going to be different. So make sure you do your own research, find out what your shocks have to be. And, you know, I don't want to be liable for your stuff because you didn't research it. So Cygnus X1 is 6 3/4. Anything else, do your research and figure it out. So I'm just going to start running this in by hand at first. Because like I said, these are not super tight. And I did spray this down with a little lithium grease. Helped out quite a bit. Let's pull another measurement. Now, let's look at this real quick before I pull my measurement. See how your pigtail ends right here. Be aware of where you took your measurement at. I actually took my measurement off of the top of the spring. So make sure you're measuring there and not the gap in between, because your measurement's going to be off, right? Because at this point, you're not going to be able to get underneath the spring like you did the first time around. Okay, so measuring from the bottom, we are right at, I'd say 6 7/8. So it needs to come in a little bit more. Not much though. Okay, measuring from the bottom of the spring one more time. 6 3/4 right on the dot. So there we go. That's preload, and I just did that by hand. Now that your preload is set, you have your 5mm hex bolt on the perch, the locking perch. So go ahead and just run that down. And this is actually what keeps your spring from loosening up. So you want to make sure this one is tight. That's a locking collar. So once this 5mm is tight, then you are good to go for the preload. Last thing I have to do is put on the little dampener adjuster up top here. So I like to take a look at where the set screw hit last time, just so you're not making a new mark on the top of the adjuster. Oh, there it is. Okay, right there. Put this little guy roughly back in the same spot. I think this is something like a 2.5mm adjustment, so it's very small. Now putting the strut on is just the reverse of taking it off. Main thing you want to be aware of is this upper camber bolt. So when you're putting it back together, even though we marked it beforehand, I've got my 2 notches lined up. Look how much movement there still is right here, right? So that is why, as you're tightening this bolt, make sure your alignment marks stay where they're at. Push on the knuckle as well, okay? Because you still have quite a bit of camber right there as well. So just make sure that your marks stay where they're at. Push in on the hub before you tighten everything down. In this part right here, as you're tightening that upper camber bolt, just make sure that your alignment marks stay where they're feeding onto each other there, okay? Because as you tighten one, the bolt will try to rotate. So just make sure they're in the right spot. Bottom one doesn't matter. Just smoke it, make sure it's super tight. So let's talk about caster and what it is, why it's good for your car, especially an STI like this. So caster, the best way visually to think of it is like a motorcycle, especially the old school lowriders that had the really raked out front ends. The reason they had that is because it adds caster to the front wheel, and it helps that wheel center up. As the vehicle is moving forward, it will straighten itself up and continue to roll straight and, keep the vehicle basically going in a straight manner until acted upon by the steering wheel or something like that. So therefore, if you add caster to your vehicle, it's going to correct that return to center type of feel. So if you're turning in a parking lot, you let go of the wheel, your steering wheel kind of snaps back to center. That's because of caster. And you want that when you're going around a turn, right? So it's going to create more of a heavy feel in your wheel, as well as when the corner opens up and goes straight again, you can start to realign, get yourself back to center. The car's going to travel straight naturally versus having to make it go back to straight, if that makes sense. So adding caster is always a good idea. Now, there are some downsides. I showed my wheel on the picture there. What happens is, as you add caster, the shock kind of leans back, right? So therefore, your tire gets pushed forward closer to your front bumper. So I've seen it in the past. If you add too much caster, then your front wheel can actually rub your bumper because it's now moving that wheel a little bit more forward. The contact patch is going forward as well. Now, let's talk about why I chose to do the factory OEM control arm versus the upgrades that are out there. So this right here is the 2008 to 2010 STI control arm. The biggest downfall was back here on this rubber bushing. So when I first got this car, these rubber bushings were completely worn out. Actually to the point that they didn't exist anymore. So when I hit the brakes, this whole thing would shake violently. It was a bad situation. The car did not handle very well. Now, when you start looking at replacements, these are kind of hard to push out, right? So a lot of times it's easier to just buy a new control arm than it is to actually push these out. Now, I replaced these in my garage. I basically just took my vise, pressed these out, or pressed the old ones out, pressed the new one in, but it was a pain in the butt. And it still didn't fix the underlying problem. So if we look at the 2011 to 2014 control arm, in the back they have a much better spherical type bushing that is designed to last a lot longer, and it's not going to wear out like this rubber bushing will over time. Now, with that being said, the old control arm like this one, as it's mounted on the vehicle, people used to change this bushing out here in order to add caster. So therefore, you can see that the stud is basically centered within the control arm. What they would do is basically move the stud back or offset the stud to where it would push that control arm out a little bit, therefore adding caster to the front suspension of this car. Now, that was good. It did work, but therefore you still have some, you have a very fine amount of caster that you can get, probably less than 1 degree. It's really hard to get a lot of adjustment just out of this right here. Upgrading to the 2011 to 2014 control arm is a much better solution. However, it doesn't really add any caster to your front end. I think it may add a little bit, but probably less than 1 degree. So not really going to be significant, but you're getting a lot better bearing, a lot better bushing in that system. I chose to go OEM because I was already adding the max caster plates up top. Now the aftermarket variants do have quite a bit of caster that are introduced into them, but therefore my wheel would have been moving significantly forward, and I would have had issues because I'm running a big tire anyway. It would have rubbed the bumper and bad things would have happened. Now OEM is good, right? I went OEM rotors on this thing, OEM brake pads. STIs were built really good from the factory. I'm not racing this thing, I'm not tracking it. Even if I wanted to, the suspension setup on this right now is really, really good. So therefore, why change something that's already good to start out with? I'm going to tweak it and enhance it a little bit, but if it works, right? So therefore, I chose to go OEM, and the cost. So the cost was probably $200 to $300 less going OEM than it would have been buying an aftermarket fancy shined up alloy control arm, whereas you're getting relatively the same thing. The only real difference in the control arms is going to be the bushings, where they're mounted at, and the types of materials that they're made out of. So, you know, if you can save a couple $100, stick with OEM, might as well, right? If you hold the two side by side, you'll notice that the bushing on the back is much, much bigger. And I think the front's relatively the same, but it was a good design anyway, so didn't really change a whole lot. But this back one, you can notice that it's significantly larger and a better type of bearing. So I'll put some of those on the screen just to show you the difference in the bearing themselves. Now let's roll up under here. We're going to look and see if my valve covers are leaking. Oil pan, fingers crossed, is not leaking. I know that my steering rack is leaking. Last but not least, I got to look at the backup switch because I'm afraid it's going out. Hopefully it's not. I've got one in the car. I can test to see if it is or not. We'll go from there, right? I'm going to unplug this one. Gosh, that is hard to get off there. Okay. There we go. Okay. And I'm going to simply plug in the new one that I have here. And let's see if that fixes our light. Well, I'll show you the light here in a second. So basically all this little switch does is as you go into reverse, it pushes this and activates your backup lights. Now the light that I am talking about is this one right here in the corner, the downhill, what is that? Hill start assist. And it is still on, which is a good thing. Okay. Y'all can see that. Let me slide up under here, sorry. Okay. It is a good thing because this little backup switch is such a pain to actually change. It's located up on top of the transmission and is very, very hard to get to. But it didn't fix my problem, so therefore I got to figure out what's going on. I have tested power, and I'm not getting power here to the plug, and I feel like that's a big issue because basically all this little switch is a continuity switch. So as soon as the little button is pressed, then it just transfers power through the switch, and without power it's not going to be working. Now, how did I come to the knowledge that the backup switch causes a downhill light? Well, that's a good question. So the light came on the other day when I put the car back together. I didn't even know this car had the downhill assist on it until the light came on. Started doing some research and couldn't really find anything that good online other than to check the fuses, which I checked all the fuses. Fuses are in great shape. Even did continuity checks on all of them with the multimeter. There is not a pop fuse in the whole system. Went down to the bottom. So there's a neutral safety switch down there too. I'm getting power to the neutral safety switch. The car will start. Pedal has to be down, all that stuff. It's working like it should. Called my buddy. He mentioned to check the cruise control system. So I checked out cruise control. It's working perfectly. And then I stumbled across an old forum that was online. And one guy was like, hey, my light came on. And then I noticed I didn't have any backup lights. I'm like, that's kind of weird, right? So first thing I did was go out to the driveway, put the car in reverse, and no backup lights. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, backup switch, right? So somehow the downhill is tied into the backup switch. So if you're rolling backwards and not in reverse, maybe the car thinks, okay, I need to activate this downhill assist or whatever. I don't really know. But I knew that my backup lights weren't working. So I checked continuity. I couldn't really get a good continuity reading through the switch, and that's what kind of made me think the switch was bad, because I couldn't get that solid beep through there. It was kind of sporadic, so I'm like, yeah, it's probably the switch. Like I said, it's like 25 bucks. Went ahead and ordered one, but it doesn't fix the problem. Yeah, we got to dig into that a little bit more, but for today, it's close to dinner time. I'm gonna go ahead, button up the car, put the front wheels back on, and gonna be done with this massive overhaul of the front suspension, oil, valve covers, all the greatness of the Subi. So thanks for tuning in. That's going to do it for this episode. Next time, we're going to troubleshoot that backup switch a little bit more, the downhill assist, all that. But weather dependent, right? So this time of year, it's very cold outside if I'm not here in the garage working. And like I said, this is a shared spot, so can't always use this location. It is what it is. But with that being said, I do have some content that I've been kind of saving up over the summertime. A couple episodes like the radiator swap, I still haven't put out that episode yet. So there's some stuff. I got to get back to the Datsun, put together the engine for the Datsun. So there's a lot of stuff I need to do. That's all down in the basement, so I can do that in a nice heated environment. Because I'm not a huge fan of working out in the driveway. I will do it if it's necessary, but if I'm doing it just to like do stuff like this, nah. I'm not going to do it. My car is going to stay the same all winter long until the end of winter. Then I'll do my nice performance upgrades. That being said, thanks for tuning in. If you like the content, please consider subscribing. Like it. It helps me out, helps me stay motivated. I'm not saying that just to try to build my channel up and get all these subscribers and all that stuff. I'm really not. The reason I want subscribers is to kind of keep me motivated, because otherwise I'm like, nobody's watching this crap anyway, so I'm not going to make videos. And then I do a bunch of work and I'm like, man, I should have recorded all that. You know how it goes, right? So if I can build my channel up, it'll keep me motivated to keep making these. Hopefully you guys enjoy the content, you get something out of it, or if at the very least it's entertaining. Hope you all had a Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday Season, Happy New Year, moving on into 2025. Get out there, work on your project, and most importantly, go enjoy your project. We'll see you on the next one.